Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
We are deep into 2025, the year of the attempted superhero comeback, and it's a big one, as we've got both Superman, the revamp of the flagship DC character directed by James Gunn, and Ironheart, the latest Marvel TV show, bringing back the character who debuted in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. But before we get into them hot superhero releases, Alistair, what else have you done?
I've been watching an interesting Japanese film, or have watched an interesting Japanese film that I'd like to recommend to our listeners. It's called Baby Assassins, and it's a dark comedy action movie about these two teenage girls in Japan who are in some kind of assassin training program, and once they reach a certain age they have to go out and cohabit in a normal flat and get regular jobs as part of their cover as regular members of society, whilst also completing the murders that they are assigned in their job as assassins. And it's a mismatched sort of buddy comedy, black comedy type film. The central dynamic is between the two assassins. One is like really shy and introverted and quite quiet, the other is much more extroverted, but they're both like really dysfunctional people who struggle in regular day-to-day jobs, such as being a waiter or working in like a coffee shop. And they go through a series of ridiculous jobs, all of them ending badly, and occasionally there's just like explosions of ultra violence, which I kind of again add to the comedy. So it's got a very specific buddy comedy, black comedy tone, but if you are interested in that sort of thing, then I can highly recommend this film.
So these assassins, are they actually babies?
No, they're like teenagers. They're like 18, 19 or something like that.
That's disappointing.
That would be even weirder, to be fair.
I know, I was mostly imagining some sort of edgy, violent version of that Space Babies episode from Doctor Who.
Yeah, that would be a thing. I don't know. So,
that would be something that I imagine would need to be anime.
Yeah, or quite short. I feel that joke would get old quite quickly because you'd have limited scope for characterization, I suppose, with the babies.
Possibly true.
We're not here to review a film that exists entirely in our heads.
No, we are not here to review a film that exists entirely in my mind, although I haven't seen the real one either, so is there a real difference? Makes you think. Anyway, so Baby Assassins. So we're into what? Dark comedy territory here?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's, very much people exploding into violence and things like that, such as, one scene when one of the assassins spends ages working in a kitchen to get the whipped cream just right on a waffle, and then takes it out to a customer who says he doesn't want whipped cream and kind of pushes it off the plate. She then, attacks him with the tray, which is just quite funny. So, there's definitely the beat of, you're kind of waiting for ultra-violence to explode at any moment. There's also another main plot line, which is they get wrapped up in a sort of gang war with the Yakuza, and there's this sort of cast of bizarre Yakuza characters who are going around trying to track down the assassins, including this Yakuza boss, his son who's a bit of an idiot, and his daughter who is again extremely extra and a bit crazy and over the top, and just sort of going around meting out violence to find these assassins. And there's a reasonable scope and scale for the action in this. There's a big shootout in a warehouse at the end. That's a lot of fun.
So we've seen this sort of quirky action dark comedy before, I guess. The title as well vaguely brings you back to Teenage Bounty Hunters.
Yeah, you're not a million miles away from it in that thing. There's also, this strange, buddy relationship in that it's siblings and stuff. But there's this sort of codependence. There's a lot of, bits of them just, hanging out in the flat, trying to behave like normal people, but they're really not. I guess, tonally, it's not doing something new. Yeah, exactly. There's, quite a lot of sort of this crazy people trying to live a regular life, black comedy type thing. I guess I haven't seen it in a Japanese context before, but other than that, it is a very good tone, and I do find it really funny. And I guess crucially the jokes come fast enough and things like that. There's one bit where they return home to have some kind of discussion about something, and then it just the camera pulls back and they've got someone tied to a chair who's begging for his life, and they're just ignoring him talking about something else. Again, that's the sort of comedy beats they're going for.
Yeah, I do always enjoy the sort of serious moments interrupted by people being either stupid or banal. So, this could well be up my alley. How did you stumble across this? Because I've never heard of this. This is completely out of my cultural sphere. But I guess Japanese culture in general has never been my thing.
It's an interesting story behind this, is that, I've been sort of trying to watch more Japanese films and things like that recently. So YouTube, which can read all our minds, served me up a video which was top 10 recent Japanese films you need to watch. And I watched the video and I was impressed that actually I'd seen a fair few of them, especially some of the ones that were further up the chart. Godzilla -1 was on there, which obviously we reviewed in the podcast instead of this review. Yeah, which was very, very good. I think that was in the number 1 or number 2 position. A film called Monsters, which I watched when I had COVID, and nearly recommended on the podcast, actually, in the post-COVID episode, but I think I went with Terminator Zero instead. That's like a sort of LGBT drama set in a school. So there's quite a few films in there I had seen, but then there was also ones I hadn't, and so, I made a list. This one seemed like, definitely my sort of thing, with the crazy tone and the violence and things like that. That all seemed like something that would be very much my sort of thing. So making an effort to broaden my cultural horizons a bit, especially as there's rumours that they're bringing back Alice in Borderland, which I did love. So if they're bringing that back as well, that'd be another interesting Japanese piece of media to discuss.
I never watched that, although I know you did recommend it strongly. Did that have an ending?
Yeah, it did. It was a pretty definitive ending, so I don't know what they're going to do if they're going to make more of it. I suppose they could just focus on entirely different characters. It would be a strange one to focus on the same characters again. Then again, they made more Squid Game, Korean, I know, but I guess that's just because it's really popular, and now they've made 2 additional seasons, which it really didn't need. So I'm a little wary of the additional seasons of things that we don't need more seasons of. That's never a good thing, but then again, it has been made to work in the past. So I guess we shall see.
Yeah, I was vaguely aware that people seem to think Squid Game didn't need those extra 2 seasons. I never watched the first season. But they seem to happen anyway, although they seem to land with a lot less interest. I don't remember that many people talking about how much they enjoyed seasons 2 and 3 of Squid Game.
No, they seem to sort of disappear into the void of, attention. However, they did market it a lot. There's been a huge amount of marketing push behind it. I guess that's because of Netflix, and they've got a hit on their hands, and they want to get as much of it as possible. But the interesting thing about the original Squid Game is that it was a kind of viral peer-to-peer hit. I mean, they pushed it a lot through the app. I think it came out during lockdown when we were all spending a lot more time on Netflix. But the success was more of it kind of either people on social media were talking to each other saying like, this was good, this is good, you should watch it. Whereas now, people aren't saying that, but they are just like pushing it instead. And it goes to show that, that like peer-to-peer virality is much more an effective tool of spreading word about something than traditional marketing.
Yeah, I have seen an advert for Squid Game, a sort of partnership advert on Sky, which seems to be telling me that eating Doritos is a lot like competing in Squid Game, which is a sales pitch that I feel might be a bit mixed up, but whatever makes them feel edgy.
Yeah. Don't know about that, but that's exactly the sort of thing that they are resorting to in order to market the new season of Squid Game. And it's not really working, is it? Because it's definitely not much of a conversation. But then again, if you like the sort of the violent tone of Squid Game, I think maybe Baby Assassins is something you'd like. I mean, Baby Assassins is pitched much more in the comedy spectrum. Yeah, whereas I think Squid Game is trying hard to say something about violent society. Whereas, this is more of a dark comedy, violent slapstick. But it's one of those films that's flown under the radar a bit. I gather it's more popular in Japan and found a bigger audience there. It's not something that's really connected with the West. But it is a recent film. I think it's from like about 2023, something like that, 22 maybe. And it's certainly worth checking out if you like the tone I've described, which is one of those tones that kind of transcends culture, even though there's some very specific cultural Japanese references in this. But the tone is one of those universal things. Black comedy and slapstick tend to be fairly universal.
I mean, it's something I like, to be fair. You've successfully made this sound interesting to me. Where are we watching it?
It was on YouTube. Like the bit of YouTube you have to pay for.
Oh, that.
So we rented it via YouTube. To be fair, they do have an enormous selection of films. If you can't find something, generally you can rent it from YouTube. They do seem to have basically everything.
Okay.
Cool. Anyway, so I've been watching violent Japanese films. Nick, what have you been up to?
I have been watching Murderbot, a new comedy sci-fi series on Apple TV, which recently concluded its first season. This is about a security droid, or sec unit, who breaks his governance module, which means he's no longer under the control of the evil corporation that technically owns him. And instead of running away and striking out for freedom and living out whatever his dreams are, he discovers he doesn't really have any involved dreams, so he just sort of continues to do his job, but just sits around sarcastically insulting the people he's meant to be guarding in his internal monologue and watching TV instead of doing his job properly. Until one day he meets a bunch of clients he actually finds himself, almost against his better judgment, starting to care about. The titular Murderbot, it's meant to be a sort of sarcastic nickname he's given himself, I think, although I've not read the books this is based on by Martha Wells. It's very loosely established, the Murderbot name. It sort of gets dropped a couple of times, almost as if they feel obliged to mention it because it's the title of the show and the books, but they haven't found a good way to actually work it into the plot, except for one bit. Anyway, getting a bit over-involved early on there. Yeah, Murderbot. It's got Alexander Skarsgård in it as the titular Murderbot. He's very good, to be fair. He is almost single-handedly selling it just through sheer awkward charisma. He's doing this sort of weird being a robot as code for having some level of socially awkward neurodiversity, where he finds it very hard to relate hate to people and just sort of avoids eye contact with them and sarcastically jokes about them to himself. And yeah, it's quite fun, it's quite funny, it feels quite loose and low stakes for a lot of it. It's been released in these 20 to 25 minute episodes for some reason. It's also got this quite slow, languid pace a lot of the time, so you do often come away from an episode thinking, is it me or did not much happen? But now that the whole season's been released, yeah, binge it 2 episodes at a time, and I think it might be quite a good experience.
Yeah, I know these books are very popular and people really like them. I'm in a sci-fi and fantasy book group, and several people in the book group have read the 13 or something of these novels, and some people read them all and say they are really, really good. So I can see why this is like IP that's prime for mining for content, to use a corporate phrase. But yeah, I know people really seem to like the tone, and also I think people who read the book say like the internal monologue of the character is part of the appeal. So it sounds like they've successfully translated that into the TV show.
Yeah, Alexander Skarsgård has a very good, wry, irritated voice going on. He does a good job of sort of portraying the slow journey of this robot to just finding these people irritating, to sort of begrudgingly having some affection for them. I don't know, it's a bit tropey, I guess, but it's done quite well here. The human characters he's working with are, I don't know, I gather they're better developed in the books. In the TV show, they are kind of a bit two-dimensional, and they're mostly just there to provide things for Alexander Skarsgård to react to, apart from a couple of them who get a bit more. David Dasmalchian's in it, who has been in a lot of stuff recently. He seems to be doing alright for himself. I think he's in the upcoming Dexter thing. And he's in this, and he's probably got one of the better characters, which I guess makes sense as he's one of the better known actors.
Yeah. No, it sounds like they've got a good cast. I pretty much watch anything that Alexander Skarsgård's in. He is very, very good. And it's interesting they've gone for this 20-minute episode format. Is that pitching it more as a comedy? Because that's what my mind says to me. 20-minute to half an hour comedy, 45 minutes to 50 minutes to an hour drama.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this argument at the moment, like The Bear is constantly nominated under the comedy category in awards, and people are always a bit, so is The Bear really a comedy apart from the fact that it's half an hour long?
It's funny. It's not comedy like joke.
It's not funny, haha, but...
Yeah, exactly. It is, but like the whole bit of John Cena haunting the people is really, really funny in a sort of weird way. It's a sort of tonally odd comedy. But yeah, and I guess we maybe shouldn't spend too long discussing The Bear, but...
We'll get to The Bear. We'll get to it. The Bear, I think, is a bit more of a drama with jokes than a comedy. And this, I think, is similar, and I don't really know why it's 20 minutes long. I don't know whether that's some level of financial decision or whether they just wanted the season to be a certain length and, could only get so much material out of the novella, or if they just thought this was a good idea. But sadly, it's not. The episodes just feel a bit too short, a bit too little happens in them. Because the thing is, they're structured like sci-fi dramas, right? You have properly beated out action sequences and long suspenseful sequences sometimes of the Murderbots walking through a corridor, tensed up and waiting for something to happen. And that sort of thing doesn't really go that well in a 25-minute slot because it just eats up all the time. The reason you can get a sitcom into 20-25 minutes and do a whole storyline is because it's just people talking in rooms. You could just cut quickly from different groups of people talking in rooms and they could just start talking and that's the plot. If you want to actually dramatise stuff, then that's when you tend to need a drama length time slot, the clue's in the verb, I guess.
You need pacing, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I thought, which we will come to, I worked with Ironheart, is that each episode has 2 big kind of set pieces, build up between them, character bits, but then we're talking 45 to 50 minute episodes.
Yeah, whereas this kind of ends up a lot of episodes where basically almost the entire episode is taken up by about 2 or 3 long scenes, which might be a difficult dramatic confrontation or an action sequence or something. And yeah, as I say, if you watch the episodes in pairs, then there's probably a satisfying amount of TV in that. But watched one at a time every week, as we did, because my partner really liked the books, so was really up for getting on this. But I must admit, I think we might have had a slightly more satisfying experience if we'd stalled a bit so we could watch it 2 at a time.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation to the listener as a way to consume the content.
I gather from the chat I see online, I have not read the books, but a lot of the people who have read them seem to think that it's not quite as good, possibly partly because they just don't give enough character development to the humans the bot is protecting, which I can imagine, because they are not hugely developed a lot of the time. But, the Murderbot's journey by itself is still pretty compelling, and it does, as a lot of things do, get particularly good towards the end, where things tighten up and it has to actually do the crux of its dramatic plotline.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and I do find androids and AIs and things like that as a metaphor for people who are neurodiverse. I mean, it's not exactly new. I mean, Data and Star Trek and lots of other characters. It's been explored before, but it is an interesting analogy.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the key themes of this, I think. The idea of the Murderbot's constant fear of eye contact and its weird, awkward tics in social situations, and the way it just wants to sit in the corner and watch its TV shows, which it just watches them on its internal hard drive without having to actually move.
That seems quite funny, yeah.
And that's, as I say, that's what it's doing instead of doing its job most of the time, until it encounters these humans it actually cares about and feels like maybe it should actually try and protect from being killed. Yeah, it's good fun, this. It's sort of a nice, light sort of sci-fi show. I must admit, I personally maybe prefer my shows either a bit funnier or a bit more dramatic. But if you want some good, light, enjoyable stuff, this is decent.
Sounds good. It's definitely on the list of things to watch. Again, my partner sounds like she would enjoy the tone, so something for us to watch together. Next, we will be discussing Superman, a film about the iconic hero, rebooting not only the Superman franchise, but also the DC shared superhero universe, this time with James Gunn at the helm, who we have enjoyed very much from his Marvel films. Let's see what he can do with DC. This film follows Superman. He's been revealed to the world. We're not doing an origin story here. He's locked in a conflict with Lex Luthor, who is determined to destroy him, both physically and his public reputation. Meanwhile, he's exploring the early stages of a relationship with Lois Lane. We've got some iconic Superman stuff going on here. We saw this film in the cinema last night, in fact, on the day of release. Nick, what did you think of it?
I thought this film was a good time. I thought this was a fun evening at the movies. I thought, as you say, they're very much doing like all the iconic Superman stuff. You know, you sometimes watch the first film in a superhero franchise nowadays, and you feel like they're holding a lot of the big stuff for a sequel. But this is, though, very much, no, let's do it. Let's do all the big Superman things. You want to see Kryptonite? You want to see him fight Lex Luthor? Of course you do. Here it all is. You know, and it's good. It gives me a lot of fun, classic Superman vibes. It gives you that sense of optimism and decency, triumphing that you want. I thought this was really good and fun, to be honest. Is it great cinema? I don't know. It's quite crowded. But on the other hand, it's quite comic booky in a way that I, as a comic fan, quite enjoyed. It just goes straight into the big silly concepts without really feeling the need to exposit or have long scenes to react to what's happening. It just rolls you straight into it, and I very much enjoyed that. I think a lot of Marvel films would probably take more time to try and ground it in people talking in rooms, but here they're just going straight into it. And frankly, that kind of historically kind of has been the difference between Marvel and DC, as long as you remember that DC isn't just Batman. And I'm glad they finally brought that through a bit in the movies. So yeah, no, I enjoyed this. As I say, I'm unclear if it's great cinema, but I thought it's a very good superhero movie.
Yeah, I agree with you that one of the strengths of the film is the way they just like launch into things. There's like, you know, a few bits of text on screen at the beginning of the film that kind of like establishes everything. Like, you know, there are metahumans and there are, you know, Superman, he's been revealed to the world. People know who he is. That we're not doing like another origin story. A tone I feel was very much set by Spider-Man Homecoming, which, you know, kind of like, yeah, we don't need to see another Uncle Ben death. Let's just like go into it. People like understand who these characters are, especially when it comes to really famous ones like Superman or Spider-Man. But not only that, they're just kind of throwing a lot of stuff from, I guess, either Superman or DC lore. So there's like a lot of other superhero characters in this. There's Mr. Terrific, there's a Green Lantern, there's the Engineer, there's Ultraman. And most of these characters I hadn't heard of before, even though I've watched quite a lot of Superman films and consumed comic media, but I'm not a huge reader of comics myself. So a lot of this stuff was new to me, but I just sort of picked it up, went with it. I was like, yep, it explains what you need to know. They just kind of chuck you in there. And yeah, it means it's quite a rich, broad film with lots of stuff going on that, again, isn't bogged down by lots of exposition and has like lots of characters in it. So I felt that actually did work quite well as an approach rather than just another kind of like Superman meets Lois Lane. He does his first public save, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that did slightly concern me going into this, especially, you know, in the very early days when they were announcing stuff, is the feeling that this was going to be really focused on setting up a new universe and it was going to be just endless, basically mini trailers for other films in a way that has not worked in the past. Obviously, I'm talking about largely the early Zack Snyder stuff.
Yeah, which we discussed at length on the podcast.
Which we have dealt with considerably on this podcast. Yeah, and I think the impressive part here is that there is both a very real attempt at giving us a world that feels rounded and populated, but also a very clear, steely-eyed focus on the actual story they're telling. You know, we don't get any, like, long spells that feel like a trailer for the future TV show starring the Guy Gardner Green Lantern. He's just kind of here to back up Superman's story. He gets enough moments so you get a bit of an idea about the sort of character he is, but it doesn't get in the way. It doesn't feel like an intrusion, and that's good. That's great, in fact. I enjoyed that a lot, and also, you know, as somebody who's read a lot of comics with that character, it was a good interpretation. A fun time. I look forward to seeing more of it.
I mean, it also builds out the sense that this is a world of lots of superheroes in it. And I think that is also related to the other, I think, crucial thing. Well, there's quite a few crucial things with this film, but one that I definitely really want to mention is the way it's setting up a new franchise, I felt, is not so much introducing these characters, although it does introduce a wide range of characters who could be picked up for other films, but more it's like it's setting a new tone, which I feel is like kind of very crucial. Like it's moving away from the Snyder dark, brooding brooding tone and to something that is more popcorny entertainment. There's quite a bit of humor in this film. There's not as much humor as like some superhero James Gunn films. I'm thinking like mainly like the Guardians of the Galaxy films, which have a much like higher density of jokes and more ridiculous characters. Although there are quite a lot of humorous moments in this, including some like really funny ones. So I think it's doing quite a good job of establishing a tone that's different from the previous DC films, but also a bit different from Marvel. It's not quite as silly and funny as some of the Marvel films. I know there's a range of tones in them. There's a big difference between, say, Guardians of the Galaxy and like Black Panther in terms of tone. But I do feel they are establishing like a summer entertainment, light-hearted, fun, maybe a bit more family-friendly tone, which is kind of, they're going to use that going forwards as like a branding piece for new DC Shared Universe content.
Yeah, and I was interested in that as well going into it, because James Gunn's previous superhero films have always been a certain level of what I guess I would call self-aware snark, you know, slightly world-weary, occasionally darkish jokes, and that's not really Superman. And clearly he knows what he's doing, because he has indeed pulled back on that considerably for his Superman film, and I think it largely works. There's a bit of gentle humour about how Superman's just such a nice, naive, straightforward guy that he almost at times comes across as a bit silly, or he just tries a bit too hard. People joke about how Superman is, well, I don't know, people bitch about how Superman is boring or Superman lacks drama because you just can't threaten him. But you can, in fact, threaten him, partly by just, you know, using your imagination and coming up with an actual threat. Come on, just actually try. And partly because, you know, the biggest threat to Superman, arguably, is him falling short of his own standards. You know, he's trying to, you know, both save the day and save literally everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And there is quite a good, like, grounding of Superman as a character in this. I think they're quite, again, them being like James Gunn and the people behind it, being quite concerned that they want to have, like, a kind of identity for Superman as a character, as well as this new tone. And, like, again, it's not as broody or moody as the, you know, the Man of Steel Superman. It's a bit more positive, upbeat, him trying to do the right thing. I mean, Superman himself doesn't have a particularly complex character arc in this film. Again, like previous James Gunn's films that we've really praised, I'm thinking like especially Guardians Volume 3 have like had really strong character arcs along with the comedy and the action and all the other stuff. But there is a solid character arc here of him like coming to accept that he's like a part of humanity and things like that, and you know the relationship to his parents, both the biological parents and his adopted parents, comes up as well, and those things like that, and that's all kind of like building up the character of Superman. Or also there's just ways that just like not taking it as seriously. I mean, there's things like Superman's like robot friends in the Fortress of Solitude, or the big one I guess being like Crypto, who like appears like in the first scene, this kind of ridiculous over-the-top, hyper-energetic super dog. That is like, you know, that's straight away we're saying we're a million miles away from Snyder Superman. Superman's got a silly dog in this one, and it's fun, and things like that. And Crypto is, probably one of the breakout characters, certainly the ones that people have been talking the most about, the people who've been like posting about this film.
No, Crypto is, as you say, he's very much the big talismanic thing for this film, saying, yes, we're doing something different. We're going harder into the sort of silly olden days DC stuff where Superman has a fortress and a bunch of robot helpers and this big silly sci-fi concept, sort of these things that aren't, you know, down to earth. I don't think it's a particularly hot take to say that obviously everyone who ever said that DC is the realistic one, the down to earth one, are people who either, when they say DC they mean Batman, or people who only ever actually watched the Dark Knight films. Yeah, obviously DC is actually mostly the big silly sci-fi one, with the exception of Batman. And it's good to see them doing that here.
Yeah, I guess that's just a reflection of Batman's like enormous popularity and like kind of stake in popular culture. But yeah, again, that's why they need to establish like this like tone, and again, like to use a corporate phrase, like brand identity or whatever for these films, and how they're different from Marvel, but also like how they are like fun superhero entertainments. Yeah, so this is like a film where Green Lantern will like swoop down and conjure a giant hammer or something like that in order to like hit a character with, you know, this makes it sound like really silly, and there's some like kind of really spectacular action scenes in this, such as like Mr. Terrific swooping in and taking out a whole base of Lex Luthor's goons using like all his tech gear, which is a pretty spectacular action scene that's played like straight up. I guess there's the signature James Gunn needle drop when the action scene kicks off, but you know there is like a lot of like action and spectacle as well in this film, which you know helps it again achieve that summer blockbuster tone more than just like it's got some jokes as well.
I mean, the thing is, like when Marvel started, they had Iron Man and all these sort of Avengers characters, and the reason Marvel still had the rights to them, whereas they'd sold off the rights to like X-Men and Spider-Man, is because X-Men and Spider-Man were the characters people actually liked, whereas characters like Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor had very little cachet. The film rights were not things anyone wanted. So the big thing they had to do in the MCU the early stages of that project were very much about selling people on the idea that, Iron Man is cool, Captain America and Thor are cool, the Guardians of the Galaxy are cool. These things are actually things you want to see films about, and this tone is actually interesting. And, I think with the non-Batman DC stuff, you do kind of have to do something similar. I can't really portray Superman as an underdog, I know, considering he's still probably one of the most recognisable superheroes. But I think he's in a weird place in that he's both the most recognisable one and also the one who's seen as kind of not cool. Or at least not someone who people seem to want to spend a huge amount of time with. So there's still a sense that you have to try and bring in the idea that this is a cool, fun universe to spend time in.
Yeah, exactly, which is what they do well in this film. I mean, yeah, you've hit it nail on the head. Superman is extremely well known, big symbol of like American culture worldwide, and phrases from Superman are used in popular parlance. Not only just the phrase like Superman, like things like kryptonite, and for example, the things that have entered the public lexicon. But yeah, I guess like people feel that Superman's a bit lame because he's like a nice guy, not as dark or interesting as Batman. And there is the thing of like the vulnerability aspect, which is that, is Superman just seen as either like impervious, both in a sort of physical sense, but also sometime in an emotional sense, which again, the Snyder ones kind of went back into, like he's kind of unreachable and his emotions are locked away in like his Man of Steel body. And this film also does a good job of making Superman seem vulnerable and relatable in that human way. I mean, the film opens with him, he's just lost his first fight and been like beaten up, and so instantly you're establishing like Superman is vulnerable. Like, there's someone out there who can kick his ass. So there's going to be vulnerability in this film, and there's other key fight sequences. I mean, this is partly because they from the beginning they've introduced these other superhero or meta-human characters to show that Superman's not just this one invincible person on a planet of regular humans. There are people who are on his level in terms of fighting abilities. So again, all that like adds to making him vulnerable and relatable as a character and more engaging. And as you say, like they've used their creativity and their imagination as filmmakers to come up with ways that like people kind of hurt Superman and things like that. There's one bit when a character, the engineer, gets close to killing Superman. I won't spoil the specifics for people who haven't seen the film, but that's quite a dark and sort of quite intense scene where he feels genuinely threatened. The fact they managed to establish that works really well and helps you like relate to Superman more as a character.
Yeah, but this is not in any way a dark film. I think, as we've now said several times, it's largely quite an optimistic, upbeat film. But I think James Gunn does have his roots in sort of horror stuff, and he did, feature some slightly dark or upsetting or gnarly moments throughout his various Marvel films, and indeed, especially in his Suicide Squad film, and of course Peacemaker. And he's still clearly tapping into that a bit here. Like, some of the ways Superman does actually come under threat are quite grimace-inducing, and there's a couple of dark moments. Like, he's genuinely committed to making Lex Luthor incredibly unlikable. He could just be a sneering, yelling, speeching supervillain, but Gunn is clearly, committed to going beyond that and making him just really brutally unpleasant. Just this guy who's just absolutely driven to being completely awful, because he just doesn't care about anything other than hurting Superman, to the point that he's just willing to do literally anything to other people, and it's genuinely horrible at times. It's not, in any way, as I say, this is not a dark, grim film, but Gunn has clearly used the dark sensibilities he does have to give a bit of an edge of danger to the action sequences and to the villain.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a classic, like, supervillain edge to him, this Nicholas Hoult Lex Luthor. Again, it's a summer blockbuster, you want, like, a big nasty villain. He's a good actor and he's like kind of camping it up a bit, but also again being like genuinely horrible as a villain. I thought there were a few sideways nods to Elon Musk that I appreciated. Maybe this is just me overanalyzing the film, but things like, I don't know, his weird relationship to his ex-girlfriends, being a tech titan who seems maniacal, with all these like strange tech projects. I feel there's like a parallel there that's there to be appreciated if you want to dig deeper into the film. But certainly this is the classic, like, we've got a big bad for our big summer blockbuster.
Yeah, no, Nicholas Holt's really good. It's a really big performance. Sometimes he's quite understated, Nicholas Hoult, in a good way, but here, no, he's just going for it, and he is equally good. It's a really fun performance. I'm glad he'll hopefully finally get his due for a big comic book performance after largely toiling away underappreciated in a range of X-Men films.
Yeah, that's a shame. Although he's done some great films, for example, like The Menu. I thought he was really good in that, again, playing a sort of villain. Obviously great in Fury Road. So he's got some good, like, big films under his belt. But yeah, I guess if he can do an iconic turn as Lex Luthor, that should be good for him. Yeah, there's an interesting sort of plot to this involving some geopolitics. Yeah, involving, like, invasions and billionaires meddling in the affairs of, like, smaller nations and stuff, which, again, lots of parallels to that in the modern age. I will say the geopolitics of this film make absolutely no sense. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film as someone who's interested in politics, but I was fair enough. I was like, look, this film is not aiming at any kind of like realistic geopolitics, but there is a bizarre plot line involving this nation with a dictatorship that seems to be simultaneously both in South America and Eastern Europe, and also its neighbor, which is basically India. And the more you think about it, the less it makes sense. Possibly Pakistan, because the other country is supposed to be dictatorship as well. But it does sort of make really no sense and is kind of a bit odd when you think about it. But, you know, it works for the story that they want to tell. I just felt with my politics hat on, I have to point out that, like, it's up there with some films with their sort of ridiculous geopolitics.
Yeah, I mean, I think James Gunn trying to very gently comment on current events there without getting too bogged down in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit when, like, I mean, this isn't really a spoiler when it's revealed that Lex Luthor's interest in the countries involves, like, getting access to, you know, huge amounts of petroleum deposits and also possibly creating a sort of extra-legal tech enclave similar to seasteaders and people like that. Again, it's riffing on kind of things you might be aware of from the crazy world of tech libertarians and contemporary politics and economics. I mean, again, it's very much like a minor note. It's there if you want to dig into it. It doesn't really affect your enjoyment of this film, which is in essence like a big roller coaster. But I guess it's that way there's a little bit more substance, and it does link to kind of the way they're kind of gently poking fun at tech billionaires. And I think it does illustrate how things have changed a lot, considering like the Dark Knight films, it's very much kind of billionaire uses his money to like sort stuff out, whereas this is more like maybe we don't like the billionaires and they're a bit crazy.
I mean, in fairness, much as we have gently pokes at the Zack Snyder films throughout this, they did also have an evil tech billionaire.
They did as well, yeah, which was also Lex Luthor. And there's also another thing that relates to this film, which is like there's quite a lot of journalism in it, which I did appreciate. Again, going back to like the fact that Clark Kent and Lois Lane are supposed to be like old school gumshoes, and that's kind of the classic appeal. Similar to how in The Batman, they actually have Batman like doing detective work and investigating crime. In this, they do actually have a fair amount of Lois Lane and Clark doing some like old school gumshoe work, which I appreciated a lot as, you know, someone who's dabbled in journalism myself. But also, there's like a key scene when Lois interviews Superman as Superman, and there's this element of like journalism is trying to hold power to account, and also saying that, like, you know, Superman is someone with like enormous amount of power beyond the constraint of any government or human institution, such as, again, like tech billionaires. I mean, like, there's like no institution in the world that seems capable of restraining Elon Musk or Facebook and Zuckerberg, maybe the US government, but really. And, you know, this point of like these people have enormous amounts of power and they have to be held to account and their decisions have to be questioned, and just because they say they're in your best interest doesn't mean it is, and they, again, should be questioned on that. And they kind of get all that into this like one scene of this interview, which I thought worked really well. And it did have something to say about, you know, there's a role of the media and reporters in this age of like where they get denigrated as like fake news and things like that. It's still vitally important for old school gumshoes to hold the powerful to account. So again, there's something going on beneath the surface of this film that's very interesting.
Well, yeah, I think it's important to fit that stuff in, partly, as you say, because it's a good message, and partly because, you know, structurally, it's probably good to give Lois Lane something to do.
Yeah, she has to solve, like, a mystery. This time also involving, like, Luthor's, like, dodgy, like, tech and military contacts.
Yeah, and Clark, I mean, I think, especially recently, in order to, you know, make Lois more important in her own right, people do tend to focus on Lois as the great reporter and Clark as someone who does all right, perhaps partly because of his, you know, unique access to Superman. I did feel that Lois perhaps got a little bit, I don't know. On the one hand, I was quite pleased this film was only 2 hours, and I was impressed how much it packed into that 2 hours. On the other hand, it did mean I kind of came away wanting more, especially of Lois. But, you know, then again, I don't know whether that's a sign of a flaw in the film or just a sign of me wanting a sequel.
Yeah, I guess it is good that they kept a reasonable running time and they did get a lot in. I'm glad that they didn't, you know, to use an internet phrase probably from quite a while ago, damsel Lois, the classic thing, Luthor captures her and threatens her to control Superman. So I think they were quite keen not to do that and give her, like, agency in her own right. To be fair, the Snyder films did that as well, and Amy Adams was, I thought, a pretty good Lois Lane. She's very, very talented. I guess it's just the film she ended up in. But this, yeah, I thought there was a good performance and the journalism side really worked. But again, as we said, this is a DC movie that's in a DC world where there's lots of superheroes. There's a Green Lantern, there's Mr. Terrific, there's, you know, Ultraman. And that is kind of, I felt, the way the focus was. And, like, you know, some of the Lois Lanes are when she goes to see, like, the other metahumans to get them to intervene to help Superman and things like that. And the focus is on the superheroes. and not on necessarily so much on like the non-superhero characters, and I guess that's just a creative decision they've made.
Well, yeah, as you say, and as indeed I said, they've made a choice to focus on DC as slightly less the world outside your window, slightly more the fantastic sci-fi world, and maybe that means less time with the regular people. But for all that, I would have happily taken more Lois. I still enjoyed the film, so.
Yeah. And also, one of the weird things that struck me is that we spent a lot of time like negatively comparing this to Snyder films, and I'm going to do that once more. But which doesn't really struck me is that the one thing that the Snyder films kind of lent into is this idea of Superman as this like huge symbol of like what we can be as like greater than ourselves, this kind of iconic symbol, which made him quite inapproachable as a character. But what I felt is that this film actually in some ways even encapsulated that better than the Snyder films did. Like there's this one key scene of like a kid raising like a flag with Superman's logo on it, and that one little scene, and then like the score kicks in, and it's a really good score they've written for this film, I must say. Actually, it's very moving. It's a good piece of music, and the score kicks in, the flag goes up, and you get the sense of Superman is more than just a man. He's this like iconic symbol of what we could be. And I was like, man, that's just subtle and quick, and it's good, and it's just like better than all like the time Snyder does it over and over and over. So again, more props to James Gunn there for that.
Yeah, and I think it's an impressive balance of Superman as this larger than life symbol, and also, as he says towards the end, as Superman, you know, he's still just a man, he's still just a guy trying his best. And he does a whole speech about it, and someone in our cinema shouted, "Fuck yeah," and then everybody cheered. You know?
Yeah, that was a good moment.
A rare moment in British cinema.
Yeah, and everyone applauded at the end. And also there was a bit when, like, in that same speech is when Superman talked about how he's, you know, an alien, he's come from elsewhere, but he's working hard to help people and make things better and, like, do his bit and, like, muck in. And, like, you know, again, it's pretty unsubtle, but it's probably what you need from a summer blockbuster to basically pretty much saying Superman's an immigrant and he's, like, making this a better place. So, like, and all these, like, nasty people with all their power, like Lex Luthor, just want to beat on him because they don't like him or for their own gain. I mean, there are messages here. I mean, I've seen on Blue Sky and places, like, lots of Fox News people, like, decrying new Superman film is woke for being pro-immigrant, and it was like, you're really like missing the subtlety if you're only now realizing, wait, Superman's an immigrant? Really? I don't know.
I suspect that the Fox people either do know that or just don't care.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right on that. But again, for a film that is like a big fun summer roller coaster, which is what it sets out to be and achieves, there is, you know, again, some interesting things going beneath the surface and some moments when it just states the politics out loud, which I appreciated. So yeah, again, fun evening in the cinema. Yeah,
no, I really enjoyed this. For all that I personally was really looking forward to Daredevil, I think this probably was the superhero event of the year for a lot of people, and I think it actually lived up to it impressively. I hope it does well.
I think it will do well. The screening was basically booked out on day of release, and there's been a lot of chatter about this, so I can imagine DC have managed to like strike gold with this. But yes, we'll see. Finally, this episode we will be discussing Ironheart, a new TV show from Marvel. After getting kicked out of MIT, Riri Williams, aka Ironheart, takes her armoured suit back to her hometown of Chicago to continue working on it. She meets some old friends and family members, but her peace is shattered when she joins a gang to commit robberies led by a mysterious figure with a powerful cloak. Also, in her drive to upgrade her suit, she creates a new AI companion based on her dead friend that shows some alarming signs of being sentient. We have seen this complete first season on Disney+. Nick, what do you think of it?
I thought this was honestly surprisingly good. I was not sure how much I expected from it, considering it's had a slightly faltering launch. It was filmed like 3 years ago at this point. It just kept getting delayed and reshot and stuff. But honestly, this is surprisingly good and surprisingly coherent. It has a slightly awkward opening, basically jettisoning most of what was set up in Black Panther 2. But once it settles down by about episode 2, episode 3, it's actually pretty good from there till the end. It's actually quite coherently plotted. It has characters who actually, you know, do things in a way that makes sense, and a clear plot that goes from there to the end, and it does actually escalate the stakes nicely. I found myself really caning through the last 3 episodes and actually, you know, caring about what happened, and it looks decent. Like, a director has actually put some thought into it. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this. It didn't blow me away, and yes, the Superman movie was probably better, but yeah, I had a good time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I enjoyed this. Yeah, it's possibly not some of the best superhero content of this year, but it's enjoyable fun, and yeah, definitely had a thing of, I watched the first episode, went straight on to the second episode, watched like the final episodes in quite quick succession. Yeah, there's definitely a sort of driving force behind the plot. It's only 6 episodes, which is probably a good length, a bit shorter than some of these normally are, and there's quite a lot of characters and plot points, which actually meant that it moved quite fast and had a really good like pacing, so that worked quite well, and there's usually like a twist in each episode. So yeah, overall well structured, good fun entertainment.
Yeah, and the armour actually appeared in multiple episodes. Honestly, I fully expected it to get wrecked in episode 1, which I guess it kind of did, and then her to spend the rest of the season trying to rebuild it and just talking in rooms until like episode 5. But no, there's a decent amount of armour action in this. There's a good few sort of action heist sequences with some actual effects in them. You know, considering, as I say, it had a slightly awkward faltering launch, they do seem to have, you know, put some effort into this and spent some money on it.
Yeah, exactly. And as we said in the bit right at the beginning, before we started reviewing Superman, each episode has a big action scene in it, and there's like build up and there's some drama, and there's usually like another like confrontation as well, and it keeps it exciting and keeps it like moving forwards. Yeah, there's usually a heist or something spectacular in every episode, a big fun set piece. So yeah, which again just keeps the whole thing very entertaining.
And it's got a good sort of lived-in vibe, you know. I think the characters, especially the characters who are meant to be like Vivi's like friends and family, have a good sort of chemistry. It feels very sort of homely. I felt like I actually gave a damn about these people after surprisingly little time with them, which is, I guess, the sign of a good TV show / film. I don't know if this is likely to get a second season. It kind of feels like it's been just slipped out to get trampled by Superman and Fantastic Four, to be honest. But I'd welcome a second season if I felt like making it.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's a good show, and there's like they leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger. Well, they sort of resolve the plot and then set up the next plot, as is often. I mean, they pushed it enough to have like a big like advertising campaign in London. They seem to be somewhat confident about it. They put, you know, from executive producer Ryan Coogler on all the posters, I guess, appealing to people who like him from both Black Panther and Sinners.
Yeah, he's been out there doing some press for it as well.
Yeah. You know, and similar to Ryan Coogler's other films, I'm not sure to what degree he's directly involved in this, but it is like steeped in kind of black culture and black society. It's set in Chicago. Almost every character is like black or a person of color of some variety, apart from a couple. Yeah, it's like set in black neighborhoods, and there's like lots of like music drops of like hip hop and like jazz and things like that I don't really know because they're not sort of my areas of expertise in music, but they do like really create this sense of like culture and place and Chicago-ness that runs through the whole thing. Again, like similar to like we said before, some of these Marvel things can sort of feel like they're kind of set in just generic anywhere. Some of them have a much stronger sense of place. Obviously Luke Cage very much set in Harlem. I always thought Daredevil was really good at being very New York. And this one I felt was pretty good at being like capturing that black Chicago culture. Again, I don't know if that's like Ryan Coogler's influence or just people who are good at telling stories in that way, but it did give it a precise sense of place and like time and locality, which helped to be entertaining.
Well, yeah, in an era where they're just dropping out a lot of superhero content, Marvel especially, all these random TV shows, yes, it helps to feel like you actually have a distinct location or a distinct voice or just a distinct anything. And yeah, I felt that this was something a bit different. And also, you know, there's a bit of, I don't know, some interesting moral flexibility and moral questions being asked. Plus, this sort of combination of technology plus magic they were kind of exploring felt a bit interesting and distinct. I guess at some point we may need to get into spoilers, I don't know. But in general, yes, there's some interesting tonal moments here.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I feel we talked about in generalities. We can drop some spoilers now. Maybe not like right the ending of the show, but I do have certain like thoughts on this.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Ironheart would have been out for a solid month or so by the time this podcast drops, so
yeah.
If you're bothered about spoilers, I guess look away now. There we go. Fire away.
Right, yeah, so I guess one of the twists is that, yeah, the mysterious hooded figure who leads the gang that Riri joins has, magical abilities, in more in the sort of Doctor Strange kind of vibe, which is not what I expected, you know, in something that bills itself as like a high-tech sci-fi kind of heist type show. It goes in this sort of magical direction, and he is a pretty good, like, demonic villain who's been possessed by this magical cape that's kind of taking him over. It's giving him, like, superpowers, but also it's kind of corrupting him. That was an interesting direction to go in, because could have just been a very much like a straight up show about tech. And this added like another dimension to it. I think one thing we were talking about once in the pub about superheroes is that a lot of them like tend to be like the villains and stuff like themed around the heroes. Like Spider-Man has a lot of like animal themed villains like the vulture, the rhino, the lizard, etc., etc. And like you said that like Iron Man, a lot of his villains are just people in other like armored suits. I guess I'm thinking like Whiplash or characters like that. I thought this was going to be again like Ironheart faces off against someone else in like an armored suit. And there's the character Joe who's like a tech guy with like who shoots lightning and things like that. But I thought it was interesting that they had this kind of tech versus magic thing going on. Riri having to embrace magic in order to overcome the villain rather than just rely on her tech brilliance.
Yeah, and I think it also I don't know, I guess it evens the score slightly because they've kind of set it up to be this sort of heist/crime show. And I guess if you've got Vivi, who's basically wearing a walking tank, that kind of puts her a bit at the top of the power class in like a crime story. But obviously, bring in some magic and suddenly it's slightly more evenly balanced.
Yeah, exactly. Without having it to be the villain also has an armored suit. So yeah, because a lot of Iron Man films, I mean, I enjoy the Iron Man films, but like a lot of them it's basically ruining the point. So at some point, the villain has to get like a suit to match Iron Man from somewhere.
A suit or some sort of tech. Yeah, definitely. Iron Man attracts tech villains.
Yeah, which is fair enough. But again, that I felt would have been the obvious thing to do, have like another tech villain turn up. Whereas like this went in an interesting different direction by having like the villain be magical.
Well, yeah, and as you say, they kind of had the tech cake and ate it as well with the Joe character, who's a bit more of an Iron Man villain. And part of this is just, tedious branding confusion, which is always particularly thrilling to talk about. But yeah, this character was introduced in Black Panther 2, and in this show they seem to be trying to retrofit her a bit into being an Iron Man spin-off character, which is fair enough because, obviously she has a certain Iron Man-ness about her, and she was very much an Iron Man spin-off character in the comics.
I mean, the clue's in the name, Ironheart.
Well, yeah, which weirdly is not said or written down at any point in the show. There's a bit where it's revealed her childhood nickname was Ironhead, I think, and you're really waiting for a line of dialogue where someone said, "Now, Vivi, it's more like Ironheart." But at no point do they say that. Maybe they shot that and realised there's just no way of making it to not sound lame.
Yeah, that's not really the tone they were aiming for.
I mean, the penultimate episode of this, which is sort of a bit of a calm before the storm, sort of wind up before the finale where the shit goes down, is a bit of a sort of long emotional break with Vivi and her supporting cast, and it's surprising how well that works and how that doesn't actually sap the momentum, which is, I guess, a clue that you've actually started caring about the characters, because you just spend a lot of time with them in this garage, and it largely works, and you largely stay invested.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I liked most about this show is how they built up the supporting cast, and they were all, like, interesting people, especially, like, the friends and family of Riri, considering most of, like, the plot is, like, focused on the gang she joins and, like, the Joe character who helps her out sort out the suit for the heists. They don't get a lot of screen time, but they are, like, really well established and built up as characters, and when they're all, like, hanging out as, like, a squad, you kind of get this sense of, like, family and community. With the exception of that is basically the character of Natalie, who I alluded to at the top of the review, a friend of Riri's who died, and she's resurrected as an AI virtual assistant who's now gaining her own sort of sentience, which is an interesting character, and also there's a really good dynamic between the two. You really get a strong